Dear white Christians.
Right, sorry about that.
That's what you, the one you know.
Yes, and it's by Harvey.
Harvey.
A woman named, with the last name Harvey.
It's not. It's
One
not.
moment, I've gotta go do a report, so I'm gonna,
By state government.
Okay, man.
Okay. I wondered if you were able to, like, send you an email yesterday, but I
I
was.
got it, yeah.
No.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now, I wanna
Oh,
get that ready for you.
But
Okay,
I keep shut, my mouth shut most of the time.
thank you. You'll just have to show me what to do.
But 17.
Is this one taken?
28,000.
cool, I was there first.
So when you're ready to show.
Like,
I'm talking about
Yeah.
the Middle East,
Delay right
the
there.
situation in Gaza.
Okay.
Okay,
And
one
is it
day,
looking for volume?
yeah.
Like, should be-
So I'm gonna admit, you know, I gotta
Keep an
put
eye
people
on-
in,
eye
right?
for that.
The bond here, if you're, we just go real quick.
We're trying to destroy, yeah. If you use the word genocide, you get. Yeah.
Just give a printout to Mary. I'll do that.
I did a class.
Because you're so
Isn't it wonderful that somebody knows that technology? I'm lucky to be able to push it up my laptop, tablet.
But Palestinians are descended from Esau, and Esau was given, you know, could you imagine if you're sitting in your house, your family had been in this town for 400-500 years?
Somebody
So I
moved
feel
from
for both.
Castillo and they did the photograph.
What do you do?
Yeah.
I heard somebody say once,
Oh, really?
they should just seal Jerusalem and give it to God. Not the Jews, not the Christians, not the Muslims, just seal it. Give it to God.
Good morning, good morning.
Oh, wow. God, it's ready.
Boy, your timing is fast.
We gotta let somebody else in.
Know whether we should start with, I'm kidding, but start with a prayer, just listen to them for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, really.
It's very
Who
peaceful.
sings praise twice?
Yes. Let us pray. O God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love. And work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth. That in your good time, all nations and races may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord.
Amen.
Well, thank you, folks, for coming back again. I appreciate it very much. I'm going to do just a real quick review of last week for anybody that wasn't here, although I think everybody, except maybe Julie, was here last week. Oh, you were here last week? So there, that's right.
Sweep the gate, we need.
Yeah, you did indeed. And just one of the definitions of reparations that I had reviewed last week. Reparations are a program of acknowledgement, redress, and closure for a grievous injustice. Where African Americans are concerned, the grievous injustices that make the case for reparations include slavery, legal segregation, in other words, Jim Crow laws, and ongoing discrimination and stigmatization. I hope in what I said last week, I didn't give the impression that I thought that reparations would be the cure-all for racial injustice or would lead us to reconciliation without other things, all the other things that people have worked on and are dear to people's hearts and that have to do with relationships and listening to others. Those are all obviously, to me, obviously, very important and necessary for the progress toward the beloved community. But I also do believe, from all that I've studied and prayed, that reparations are necessary. One of the ways this is worded in a number of texts is reparations are necessary or essential, but not sufficient. And I think we are more likely to hear about and maybe be involved in at some point what Darity labels racial equity initiatives, rather than using the term reparations, because he wants to save that for federal reparations. And after having read 2 books by him and Mullen, I understand why he advocates for that separation and why he advocates so strongly for federal reparation. May it happen, but anyway. And last week, probably the thing you remember most is the Episcopal Church really wants us to do this. It's been said in many places, and this is a quote from presiding Bishop Michael Curry from 2023. The denial of reparations for African slavery remains the main root of economic inequality in the United States. And confronting this issue with social justice work has become an integral way for church members to rectify the problem. Pretty strong statement. The Black-white wealth gap turns out to be, in Darity and Mullen's opinion, the strongest single indicator of the impact of white racism or white supremacy over time. And I'm going to go over a few of the statistics about the Black-white wealth gap. They're pretty grabbing. They're pretty heart-wrenching too. The Black share of the population nationally is 13%, but Blacks have only 2.5% of the nation's wealth. The white share of the population is 70%, but have 92% of the nation's wealth.
I
25.
don't have any of it.
I've had some of those responses to what I've read. 25%, or 1/4 of white households, have a net worth of greater than $1 million. You want to make a comment about that too? 25% of white households have a net worth of greater than $1 million. 4% of Black households have a net wealth of greater than $1 million. In this was from December of 2020. The median white household has a net worth 10 times that of the median Black household.
Could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes. The median white household has a net worth 10 times that of a median Black household. In the third quarter of 2023, 45.5% of Black households owned a house versus 74.5% of white households. In 2016, the net worth of the typical white family was $171,000, which is nearly 10 times greater than that of a Black family, which in 2016 was $17,000.
That's median.
There are a lot of ways in which the gap is created. Part of it is because of the various forms of inheritance that, and of course I'm generalizing here,
Mhm.
but that many white families are able to pass along to their offspring. This is called the intergenerational wealth transmission. These inheritances, which I'm going to describe in a minute, result in missing wealth among African American descendants of the enslaved and extra wealth among the descendants of the ancestors, white enslavers. Superior education, cultural experiences, social contacts, which will translate for one's children into higher salaries and increased savings. Gifts at major life events like college admission, weddings, starter homes, schooling for grandchildren. Transmitting financial knowledge, giving their children greater exposure and comfort with different forms of investments. Inheritance is only the most visible form of intergenerational wealth transfer. And so the number one goal of reparations is not something to do with our guilt and relieving our guilt. It's not even, from my perspective, a matter of a spiritual matter or a moral matter. The goal is to reduce the racial wealth gap, to open up the opportunities to African Americans that have been available more to whites, to make things equitable.
Isn't that a moral matter that
Well,
life should be equitable?
Equitable, thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
it is indeed. It is indeed. Yes. So I'm going to spend a little time going through the reasons for which the gap has occurred and the reasons for which reparations are owed. But first, I just remembered. First, we're going to listen to a 5-minute YouTube video from Tahisi Coates. His presentation at the hearing about reparations, about the HR 40, which is the bill that's been introduced time and time again to at least have a study commission on reparations. And then more recently, or it is to be revised to also to develop plans for reparations. Yes, I'm ready. I guess I should get out of the way.
Asked about reparations. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell offered a familiar reply. America should not be held liable for something that happened 150 years ago, since none of us currently alive are responsible. This rebuttal proffers a strange theory of governance, that American accounts are somehow bound by the lifetime of its generations. Well into this century, the United States was still paying out pensions to the heirs of Civil War soldiers. We honor treaties that date back some 200 years, despite no one being alive who signed those treaties. Many of us would love to be taxed for the things we are solely and individually responsible for. But we are American citizens, thus bound to a collective enterprise that extends beyond our individual and personal reach. It would seem ridiculous to dispute invocations of the founders or the greatest generation on the basis of a lack of membership in either group. We recognize our lineage as a generational trust, as inheritance. And the real dilemma posed by reparations is just that, a dilemma of inheritance. It is impossible to imagine America without the inheritance of slavery. As historian Ed Baptist has written, enslavement, quote, shaped every crucial aspect of the economy and politics of America, so that by 1836, more than 600 million, or almost half of the economic activity in the United States derived directly or indirectly from the cotton produced by the million-odd slaves. By the time the enslaved were emancipated, they comprised the largest single asset in America. $3 billion in 1860, more than all the other assets in the country combined. The method of cultivating this asset was neither gentle cajoling nor persuasion, but torture, rape, and child trafficking. Enslavement reigned for 250 years on these shores. When it ended, this country could have extended its hallowed principles, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness to all regardless of color. But America had other principles in mind. And so for a century after the Civil War, Black people were subjected to a relentless campaign of terror, a campaign that extended well into the lifetime of Majority Leader McConnell. It is tempting to divorce this modern campaign of terror, of plunder, from enslavement. But the logic of enslavement, of white supremacy, respects no such borders. The god of bondage was lustful and begat many heirs. Coup d'etats and convict leasing, vagrancy laws and debt peonage, redlining and racist GI bills, poll taxes and state-sponsored terrorism. We grant that Mr. McConnell was not alive for Appomattox, but he was alive for the electrocution of George Stinney. He was alive for the blinding of Isaac Woodward. He was alive to witness kleptocracy in his native Alabama and a regime premised on electoral theft. Majority Leader McConnell cited civil rights legislation yesterday, as well he should, because he was alive to witness the harassment, jailing, and betrayal of those responsible for that legislation by a government sworn to protect them. He was alive for the redlining of Chicago and the looting of Black homeowners of some $4 billion. Victims of that plunder are very much alive today. I am sure they'd love a word, the Majority Leader. But they know, this committee must know, is that while emancipation deadbolted the door against the bandits of America, Jim Crow wedged the windows wide open. And that is the thing about Senator McConnell's something. It was 150 years ago, and it was right now. Typical Black family in this country has 1/10 the wealth of the typical white family. Black women die in childbirth at 4 times the rate of white women. And there is, of course, the shame of this land of the free, boasting the largest prison population on the planet, of which descendants of the enslaved make up the largest share. The matter of reparations is one of making amends, indirect redress, but it is also a question of citizenship. In HR 40, this body has a chance to both make good on its 2009 apology for enslavement and reject fair weather patriotism. To say that a nation is both its credits and its debits. That if Thomas Jefferson matters, so does Sally Hemings. That if D-Day matters, so does Black Wall Street. That if Valley Forge matters, so does Fort Pillow. Because the question really is not whether we will be tied to the somethings of our past, but whether we are courageous enough to be tied to the whole of them. Thank you.
Wow. Now, who was that? Easy Coates. Oh,
How could I say anything after that?
I know.
Yeah.
Wow. So as I go through these aspects of our lives, the history of America, think about, among other things, rather than being caught up in each one, about how they contributed to the racial wealth gap, which we hope that reparations would eventually eliminate, but certainly address. There was first colonial slavery. There was British slavery that then was brought to the colonies from 1619, the beginning, to 1775. And then there was US slavery from 1776 to 1865, which was the crucible that produced white supremacy in the United States. There were 4 million enslaved persons at the start of the Civil War. If I ever knew that before, I don't remember having heard it until I started this round of studying this. 4 million enslaved persons. That contributed to lost incomes, lost inheritances, lost opportunities to accumulate capital, lost freedom, and of course, pain and suffering. You had something.
I was wondering what was the population of the US at that time?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I do know that in some areas there were more enslaved persons than there were others.
And they were only counted as part of a person.
Was that for vote purposes, or voting purposes, or in general for their property? For their property.
Like they were 5/8 of a person or some
Yes, that's right.
fraction,
3/5.
3/5.
After emancipation happened, there was very soon after that, the black codes were put into effect, and they were local and state laws to restrict. Essentially, they reintroduced the same rules that went with being an enslaved person. Oh, thank you. US population in
31,443,322 in 1860.
Thank you.
Say it again.
31 million.
31 million.
And four, how many million were slaves?
4.
Four.
Wonder if the slaves were included in.
But you have to concentrate that in this,
In the southern states.
the southern states, yeah.
So the black codes were enacted in the late 1865 and in those years. And ways that the labor of blacks was continued to be called by these former slave owners, included the children of blacks of parents that were deemed inadequate were apprenticed to their former masters. Sharecropping system was one of the economically exploitive systems. Convict labor. So vagrancy was one of the laws that was among the black codes that was frequently used to then arrest and convict someone and have them be essentially re-enslaved. From 1866 to 1961, there were white massacres, 35 massacres in which black people were killed, violence was done, black property was destroyed, black property was appropriated by whites. And the present value of the black property that was destroyed or seized during the Tulsa massacre of 1921 has been estimated to be worth at least 611 million. And when black property owners didn't have a title or an established will to prove that the property was theirs, it was often taken by whites. And land grants were made to whites that were not available to blacks. The Homestead Act of 1862, 160-acre land allotments were made to 1,500,000 whites. And not available to blacks. The lynchings that have occurred from 1877 to 1950, there were 4,084 in 12 southern states.
That were known.
Yeah, no, yeah.
And some of those were to white allies of blacks. Jim Crow, the legal segregation. And those laws were in effect until 1965. When one of these dates is during my lifetime, I know I go.
Yeah.
But they began in 1870s, the Jim Crow laws that had all those rules about how blacks had to stay segregated from whites. During the New Deal from 1933 to 1941, the New Deal measures couldn't pass Congress if they threatened the Jim Crow laws in the South. Farmers and domestic workers were excluded from the New Deal laws and opportunities, such as new welfare policies that were enacted that included pensions. These were the good things, pensions, unemployment benefits, war assistance through the Federal Emergency Relief Administration. That was in 1933. Those weren't available to blacks. Excluded from the Social Security Act of 1935. Workers' rights that were granted by New Deal legislation did not apply to farm workers or domestic workers. The Federal Housing Administration enacted in 1934 that offered 0% down payments with low interest rate mortgages covering up to 80% of a purchase price. Blacks were excluded from those. And of course, from living in many areas, the redlining process, preventing white homeowners from selling their property to African Americans. During World War II, there was segregation. There was, in fact, a 1940 policy that forbade the intermingling of troops. But 10 to 11% of soldiers were African American, and they were in segregated units and given the lowest paying jobs. And those that weren't soldiers, 75% of defense industry jobs were closed to Black people. While unemployment among white Americans fell during World War II, it remained constant for Black people. In 1941, the Roosevelt administration issued Executive Order 8802, which declared that there would not be discrimination in the employment of workers in defense industries and in government. But that win was followed by intense white backlash, and due to white violence that was a part of that backlash, African Americans were systematically denied entry into the labor force. And then the GI Bill of 1944, when veterans got low-cost mortgages, low-interest loans to start a business, 1 year of unemployment compensation, tuition and living expenses to obtain education. The GI Bill was administered locally, and both northern and southern states discriminated against African Americans. And as a result of the redlining, until 1977, the GI Bill's massive housing subsidies mostly excluded Blacks, so the Black underclass grew in urban ghettos, while a large white middle class emerged in suburban subdivisions. Banks refused to give loans to eligible African Americans. And ongoing, the discrimination in housing, employment, banking, education, healthcare, restrictive covenants, predatory lending. White home ownership was actively subsidized by the federal government between 1933 and 1977, with tax benefits going disproportionately to white Americans. And then a whole phenomenon of which I have not had enough awareness is the mass incarceration of mass incarceration in general, but it's disproportionately affected Blacks that started with the war on drugs. Um, and I read the new Jim Crow Friday, and I just sort of swallowed it whole. Wow, I mean, it's a book I highly recommend, and I can't even quote the author's name.
Cat pipeline,
Okay,
yeah, the pipeline to prison,
yes, but I don't know
Yeah.
the author's name.
Michelle,
Alexander.
yes.
Alexander?
Yeah. Wow. And I really wish I'd been able to make these charts huge, but it was like 5 o'clock yesterday and it didn't happen. But you can, this is I'm gonna hold it up. You'll be able to see the 3 bars at least. The racial and ethnic disparities in state and federal prison in 2021. And the top one is Black, and the middle one is Latinx, and the bottom one is white.
And the population of the US is the exact opposite.
Yes,
That's the
Right.
horrible thing.
Yeah,
right.
yes.
Because they couldn't call it the war on blacks, so.
Right.
I don't know if y'all can see that. Nope, not gonna see it.
Well, it looked like it was showing up on the screen.
It looks good on the
Mhm.
screen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fine.
Okay, I'll give it a shot at.
So the tiny numbers, which you can't even see are there, are the rate of imprisonment per 100,000. For Blacks, it's 901. For Latinx, 434. For whites, 181.
Could you read this again?
901 per 100,000 for Blacks, 434 for Latinx, 181 for whites.
They're all too many.
African Americans are more likely than white Americans to be arrested. Once arrested, they're more likely to be convicted. And once convicted, they are more likely to face stiff sentences. However, African Americans and whites use drugs at similar rates.
Yeah.
But the imprisonment rate of African Americans for drug charges is almost 6 times that of whites.
No, I was just gonna ask Jack, what is, when you're working with death row inmates and people who are being executed, do you have a percentage of Black versus white in that?
I think it's about 50-50.
Is it?
It's close.
That's interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
Of people who are on death row.
Right.
But,
Okay.
But not
but
prison.
that's because there are so many more white people.
Because the murder rate is higher among whites and black on black crime is not punished as
Right.
highly as white on white or black on white. Which is the
Also,
worst.
a lot of those numbers go back to wealth and the ability to get good legal representation,
Mhm.
ability to get bail and so forth.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Faith, I was gonna mention, for those not inclined to read a book about this, the mass incarceration, that Ava DuVernay's excellent film called 13
Yes.
walks you through that in such a way that, you know, I found it to be very memorable. It was my best education about this topic, was watching her numbers, and
It's
she's a
13th,
wonderful
it's
filmmaker.
13th. 13th.
Is the name of the film.
Oh, okay.
Origin, yes,
Oh, yeah.
very good.
Yeah, it is indeed. And that's on Netflix. Yeah.
Origins in theaters, we saw it up at the Grand.
That book is very good too.
Yes, I read the book too.
I also didn't realize the massive impact of the war on drugs. And actually, the war on drugs at the time that it was officially enacted, started, the rate of drug crimes was going down. And again, I'm just gonna hold this up and you're gonna be able to see a sweeping curve that has begun to come down, and I don't know exactly what has brought it down. I will say that I could only swallow so much history in in a week, but you'll be able to see that there's two red verticals, and one is when it started in 1972, and when it the peak year, which was 2009.
And what information is being graphed to this?
That this is the US state and federal prison population.
Oh, wow.
And for those who, it's 1.5 million at the top. A little bit over 1.5 million.
Wow.
And one thing I learned this just yesterday is that in North Carolina, if you get arrested, a police report is made on every arrest or detention or a stop. And those police reports are not expunged even if there's no arrest or you're not convicted. That police report follows you throughout your life. So if a cop stops your car and goes back to his car and calls up a police report on you, it can
Wow.
say that when you were 17-year-old, you stole a car and had a joyride, even though you weren't convicted. There were no charges made. But the police report
The
stays
investigation,
with
yeah.
you. It's more than your arrest record. I hadn't realized that that's the case in North Carolina.
It'll say at the bottom, not charged for lack of evidence or something like that,
Whatever.
but you can pull it up on Google. You don't, I mean, any of us could.
What about, and expungement doesn't change that at all?
No.
What is it expunge?
Well, it's like guys who get off death row because they're exonerated.
Right.
If they go to apply for a job
Yeah.
and it says, have you ever been convicted? They still have to say
Say
they've
yes.
been
Yeah,
convicted.
yeah.
Now, the judge or the employer might then say, well, what was it for?
Yeah.
And
If
give
you're
you a
lucky.
chance to explain.
Right, if you're lucky.
But most time you won't even get to that point. So they still have to say they've been convicted of capital murder.
And thinking about the war on drugs, I think I read somewhere that the penalties for cocaine
Right.
that white people would snort or whatever weren't as much as the penalties for crack cocaine.
Yes.
Yes, actually, that's been slightly improved, that differential recently, but the reason I'm mentioning this is I was shocked to find that the improvement is that now the amount for which you're charged is it's 28 to 1. It's still enormous, the amount for which you're charged, I guess, with having possessed the crack cocaine rather than powdered cocaine. Something awful. All these things together are what has contributed to the ongoing enormous black-white wealth gap.
That needs to be really publicized. I mean, you know, like in church handouts.
Yeah.
Because I don't think most people recognize that, even though a lot of them are in our lifetime.
Yeah. Yes, actually, what I read was that most people, most whites especially, believe that things have been equalized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That there aren't there aren't policies that still need to be changed.
Right.
The schools have been desegregated.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that's another,
Have you been up north?
And the minute.
Where I come from,
and resegregated.
very segregated, very
You mentioned,
segregated.
the minute you mentioned reparations,
Mhm.
8 out of 10 people will say, well, that was way back then.
Right.
I'm not involved in that.
Yes.
Like it was on the
Yes,
video.
exactly.
And that video was I'm glad we're recording it, because that would be nice to be able to refer to if you want to help somebody understand. what the
Let's
deal
say
is.
out of 10 white people. White people are very aware
Yeah.
that, that their children are the first, college graduates in their
Oh,
families.
yes.
Yes.
Yes, that would.
The first homeowners in their families. and so-
How often do you hear somebody who's being, received accolades, it's a first generation graduate or whatever, you know, we had that at the law school.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how many of you are my generation, but when I think of what I didn't, or what
Yeah.
American history
Oh,
was
my.
taught,
Oh,
what junk,
yes,
absolute junk.
Yeah.
In terms of what we needed to know, what was really happening, and it's alarming, it really,
When I
that's
learned-
why I think a lot of people think everything is fine.
Yeah.
The lies my teacher told me.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
the books themselves.
Well,
it's a book.
I mean, it makes you just angry.
Yes,
Yeah.
You know,
When I learned about the Tulsa massacre, I was furious
yeah.
that I didn't know about that.
right.
I think what's, perhaps even more alarming is if you go back and look at the, South Carolina history book,
Mhm,
say when I was 7, 8 years old,
mhm.
and you compare it to the South Carolina history book now, it's not a whole lot different,
Oh, wow.
to be honest.
That's true.
I mean, there's some considerations, but, you know, the truth is not to be told. I also don't believe that, you know, 8 out of 10 whites don't know. I think it's really that they don't want to know.
Denial.
You know, and in South Carolina, at one point, the population was 55% slaves. And thus, the other people in the state were extremely afraid because if the slaves ever organized, never, you know, they were in trouble. The other consideration is that we think of these things as happening in the past. When I was in Roanoke, Virginia, teaching in 2000, I had a student who told me about a situation. He was 20 at the time. He and his friends were out in the woods one time. They were accosted by a group of whites, and he was faster than his friend. His friend didn't make it.
Oh.
He what?
It was faster than his friend.
Still, his friend was still.
His friend was killed. And so we're sitting in class, and we're in a mixed class, and I'm trying to deal with his anger. He said my anger is justified because, and then I had nothing else to say anymore. We dismissed class and came back to it, you know, the next time. But these things aren't changing as we think they are, as a particular individual.
Well, look at the fact that the history, people want to take, in certain states want to take the history out of the history books. So that poor little white boys and girls don't have to learn about it because it might offend them. What? Learning history should not offend anyone.
Actually, it
thing
should
of the-
offend everybody.
Well,
Yeah.
I guess that's the case.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you should want to do that. You should
Yeah.
want to learn the actual history.
Yeah.
Well, no, and you think the vehicle that we have in terms of television and social media to really learn the truth and how much of it is wasted in telling the stuff that is totally irrelevant. But yet a vehicle like this used by the right people, in my opinion, could wake people up, but we don't see that. They're not the type of programs we watch. They're not the type of programs we're into.
One of the things we're gonna do next week is to go through the history of reparations. Which is actually a long history. And there were reparations to slaveholders for the taking and loss of their
The
slaves.
income.
Unless they're little.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're all familiar with the phrase 40 acres and a mule.
Yeah.
Which were
Yeah.
promised, which Lincoln had signed, which was promised to freedmen.
Right.
And was a particular, I was gonna get the statistics because it's rather amazing here.
This
Yes.
morning's headlines on the front page are continuing the discrimination. If anybody has read the front page of today's paper.
Oh, look at it.
Which one, the school money is being.
So the Leandro,
The
yeah.
Leandro, yes, indeed. So let's see, was the 40 acres. And that was field order number 15. 40 acres were the field order set aside 5.3 million acres of land for the freedmen. However, only 40,000 freedmen were settled on 400,000 acres. And then President Andrew Johnson eliminated that. Um,
And I don't think Lincoln ever signed that. I think that was a
Oh.
field order by Sherman.
Yep, but you're right, General Sherman's special field orders. I shouldn't stop looking at my notes because that's not much of it is penetrated very deeply except for the impressions of it. What else would you all, I have finished what I've got. What else would you all like?
I
to-
think the book that we're studying, I'm sorry, go ahead, that we're studying with the diocesan book study is, oh.
Yes.
It covers a lot of
It
it.
does.
Wilmington's Law.
Wilmington's
Yeah,
Law.
Wilmington's Law.
Mhm.
And it talks, you know, the harassment and, oh, the blacks, or some of the blacks are in power, ooh, we have to get rid of them. And the lengths to which people go to do that is just,
And the distorting of history,
yes,
how it was very intentionally
yes.
distorted to say that blacks were threatening, were rising up and threatening
Yes.
whites, and that they were buying up all the
Agitation.
guns,
Agitation.
when it was in fact whites that were buying up all the guns.
Yeah, because whites wouldn't sell guns to blacks.
Just
I
incredible.
remember, I guess I was 11 or 12, and my parents were looking for a better apartment. And we went to this place called Oakland Gardens, which ironically is like 15 blocks from where Stuart grew up. But they took all, I know, if that could have happened then. But they took all our information as if they were going to rent us an apartment, but we never heard back.
Right.
What I did to get around it was when Stuart and I wanted to buy an apartment in Manhattan, I sent him first
Right.
and got them interested in selling to us. And then, once they were on the hook, then I came.
Yeah, but, and I've had people, the same thing, you've had people calling on the phones as an experiment. I'm calling as, and then you have it like, a Hispanic sounding name, or, you know, and then you, or voice or whatever, and same thing happens. I'm sorry, that one's not available. But when a white person calls in, yeah, when can you put a white down payment? It's incredible.
We ran into that when we moved here too.
Did you?
Oh, yeah. One thing I was gonna say, this is kind of related, but the school system, it just blows my mind that this happened, but my children are 34 and 30. And I remember getting some information from school when they were in elementary school, and both of them were listed as white. And so I went to the school to say, my children are not white, but they're both white and black. And they said, well, you've got to make a choice, because we don't have
A designation.
a designation other than white or black. And I said, well, why did you list them as white? And they're really honest. They said, we did the eyeball test. They look white.
Well, and what was supposed to happen today is that the student, if it's an older student, is supposed to be asked what they want to have listed as, and if younger, the parents are supposed to be asked. But it doesn't happen that way.
Well, now I think there was, by the time they graduated.
There was an alternative.
There was an alternative.
Yeah.
But when they were in elementary school, they were either white or black. And my kids were white because they looked white.
Yes.
As you were reading down through all the statistics and all the, as you said, causes, I started looking at the root cause. Is it the root cause attitudes?
It's white supremacy.
Right, which is.
Because somebody has to bring up this requirement.
Yes, yes,
And that is the white whatever.
yes,
Either south, north, east, or west.
yeah,
And, you know, that's what we really need to get changed.
right.
If we give $1,000 to a black company, person, okay, isn't that maybe gonna throw more gas on the fire? Because now the whites are gonna say, well, they're giving them over there, why don't we have it over here? And, you know, get that back and forth. So really, I think what has to happen is the attitude adjustment of both sides.
That may be that may need to also happen. I guess from my perspective,
Mhm.
both need to happen. But I do hear what you're saying.
Yeah, it's gonna have to happen if we wanna get rid of the problem.
Yeah.
Has anybody here, seen the HBO series? It's called Watchmen
No.
with Regina.
I heard it was
so good.
awesome.
But in that, they kind of portray the next step after reparations set in Tulsa.
Oh.
And, you know, they're trying to, determine who deserves reparations and stuff like that. And then they portray the backlash. And it's chilling. It's almost like a horror story, you know, and it is futuristic, but it's very well done.
Wow, Watchmen.
HBO.
There's one of the things I was gonna mention, and I know every state is different, but, coming from Ohio, and it's been declared unconstitutional numerous times, but schools are funded through property taxes. I don't know if it is here as well, and so you've got the property ownership gap. And the wealthy schools get more money and the impoverished schools don't, and, you know, I never understood, because I'm naive, how the Supreme Court can declare something unconstitutional numerous times, and it continues to be how it happens. And
People find ways around it, huh?
Yeah.
The force of white supremacy.
We used to call, I wrote an editorial once referring to, the property tax, tax deduction as being welfare for the rich. I'm not the only one who's ever said that, but, oh, did I get a little bit of blowback about that?
The terms I was using was separate but equal.
Yeah.
And wasn't even equal about it.
Thank you all so much for.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, thank everybody.
And I will get through this book at some point.
Oh, yeah, it's.
Oh, yeah. I'm so warm and cozy. Yeah.
I've got a heater right up my back.
Yeah, my home is pretty chilly, so I'm usually wrapped up in blankets and things.
Yes, this is, this book and that book are by the same authors. They're by Darity and Susan. And this one is called The Black Reparations Project.
Get a couple of these books and lay them around my house, that will spark conversation with my son.
And a whole bunch of them laying around my house, getting to read them.
Yeah. Well, I live with my son, and he and I have different perspectives on things, and I think from.
I love your name.
And I live in his house, he doesn't live in mine. I live in his house. And he is a kind, loving person. Voices that he listens to, I think if he could just learn some of the facts.
From your point of view.
From my point of view, yes, because he's like, well, this. And I'm like, well, what's your story? So.
Yeah.
I don't talk about it too much, I just, but when I do share something, just listen. And just walk away. And